points of identification for this one.
Yep. So we're going to look at mushrooms. Okay, first off, there's no mushroom that will poison you by touching it. You have to eat the mushroom, so it's okay to kind of pull the mushroom out of the ground. I want to try and get as much of the mushroom as possible. Ooh, cool. Okay, so let's talk about, I'll actually pass it around. Don't eat, but go ahead and look. Whoops, this one broke off. Whoops. So it's really brittle. Okay, so we're talking, what are 8 structural features of a mushroom? Okay, first structural feature is, what is it growing on? So the main purpose of mushroom is to break down plant matter. And some mushrooms will be very specific to the actual species of trees or bush or thing like that that I like to grow on. So what it's growing on will tell you something. Is it growing on dead wood? Is it growing in leaf litter? This one seems to be growing in leaf litter. So leaf litter. Then looking at the base, we got leaf litter stuck to it. We got fine hairs coming off it like roots. Those are the mycelium. Other structural features, so this has fine hairs. There could be a sac, like an eggshell sort of thing that it grows from, called a vulva. But this has no sac. It just has the fine hairs. So then we're looking at the stem. How long is the stem? How thick is the stem? What color is the stem? Are there any secondary features on the stem? Like, is there a pattern to the coloring? Some mushrooms will have like a web of purple running down a white stem. This one just seems to be brown, kind of off-white brown. Touching it, pushing on it a bit and waiting. Does it change color where you touched it? Does it bruise? Does it bruise? If it does bruise, is it bruising yellow? Is it bruising blue? Is it bruising green? So, like I said, some mushrooms, just by touching them, causes them to start changing colors, and that color change is a structural feature. Is there any ring on the mushroom? And this one, again, on the stem, there's no ring. We talked about some mushrooms hatch from an egg, and that egg remains at the base. Other times, the egg kind of comes up the stem some and hangs from the stem. And if there is a ring on the stem from that egg, are the strands pointing up, or are they pointing down? Because again, it'll be different on different species and different things. So the direction of the shroud around the stem, is it pointing up or is it pointing down? That's a thing. Okay, then we follow it up higher to the cap, and we look. We have gills on the underside. So does it have gills? Does it have tiny holes called a polypore? So we have gills on this one. Looking at the gills, and I'll start passing around because I think I got everything here in my brain. So on this one, the gills, it looks like there's 2 types of gills. Ones that start at the edge and go just a little ways in from the edge, and some that start at the edge and go almost all the way to the stem, but stop before they reach the stem. So, and also how close together are the gills? These are tight-packed gills. The gills are very close. Some you'll find a pretty good gap between the gills. So the gap distance between the gills is a structural feature. The length of the gills is a structural feature. If all the gills run from the edge of the cap to the stem, or do they run part way and stop and overlap? So the length of the gills plays a role in the identification. In this case, as you saw it, man, again, 3 hands. We have the cap, we have the stem. The gills stop just before the stem. So there's a definite gap between the gills and the stem. That's another structural feature that helps you identify it. Because the gills can stop just before the stem, can stop right touching the stem, or they can actually run down the stem. And again, it depends on the type of mushrooms. The color of the gills. And then do the gills change color if you touch them? And then there's, just to make it even more complicated, is it a true gill or a false gill? So can I have that one back for a second here? So I'm just going to break a piece off. Oh, good. All right, so those of you that have the cap, break a piece off. These are false gills. So I'm going to pass it around for you to look at. A false gill is where you have cap tissue, and then the gill tissue is a completely separate tissue. In this case, you can see the cap is white, the gills are kind of a brown tan color, and there's a seam between them. You can actually peel the gills off the cap. So those are true gills. Think like gills on a fish. A false gill is where that cap material just on the underside gets wavy. So if we luck out and find oyster mushrooms, the oyster mushrooms have what's called a false gill, where it's not a true gill, it's not separate tissue from the cap, it's the same tissue as the cap. So that's a false gill.
There you go.
Okay, so, okay, the gills, where they end, false gill. The smell of the mushroom is an indicator. And now we look at the cap. How big is the cap? What color is the cap? Are there variations in color on the cap? Are there any other structural features like spots, like the Mario Brothers magic mushroom? You got the white spots on it. Is there anything like that going on? Does it bruise a different color? Is it smooth? Is it hairy? Is it dome shaped? Is it flat? Is it funnel shaped? Is it round? So lots of structural features, but you go through, you can go online, and most mushroom books will actually have a checklist. And there's actually an app that I like for it. No, sorry, they stopped making it. There was an app called Rogers Mushroom. And you started, okay, what color is the cap? What size is the cap? You put that in there, and then it goes through all the different things I talked about. It gave you choices. Does it have this? Does it have that? Does it have that? And then after you mark the different choices, then it says, most likely it's one of these 5 mushrooms. And then it gives you more information on that. So you can't just take a picture and have it identify it. You had to use what's called a key guide to go through and find it out. And really, when you're looking at, especially mushroom books, that's what you want, is a good key guide. And lots of pictures. So.
Do you have any recommendations?
Yes, I do. So if you just want to focus on edible mushrooms, 100 Edible Mushrooms by Michael Koh, K-O-U. Absolutely fantastic, because what he does is he starts you out in the grocery store and has you buy several different mushrooms and then walks you through the dissection of them to teach you, when I say this term, this is what I mean. So he walks you through a portobello and a button and a few others, a shiitake. So you know what the author is talking about in the wild mushrooms, because he walked you through a store-bought mushroom. If you just want to identify mushrooms in general, there's Texas mushrooms, there's mushrooms of the Gulf Coast, and there's mushrooms of the Southeast. If you go to my Amazon store, the amazon.com/shop/foraging Texas, there's a 6-level path to become a forager, starting with beginner books, but step 5, I think, is the mushrooms, and that's where I talk about the mushroom books that I recommend. But to start with, 100 Edible Mushrooms by Michael Koh. Absolutely fantastic book.
Is there one particular feature that's always a red light, or no?
Nope.
What were those ones?
Yeah, so I'm thinking like the only one would be if you're feed it to your neighbor and they die.
Yeah.
No, there's no rule of thumb when it comes to mushrooms. The closest would be if it is a polypore. So on this we had gills. A polypore just has a bunch of tiny holes in the bottom. If it is a polypore growing on a dead tree, it won't kill you.
Okay.
So it'll taste bad. It generally has medicinal properties, but yeah, as far as a simple, easy test for identifying edible mushrooms, no.
One more question.
Sure.
Which one will make me grow taller?
Go ask Alice.
What kind of mushrooms were those?
No idea. Well, okay, I have a slight idea based on what I was seeing. They might have been a sabicillin of some sort, but they did not bruise blue, so it's not any of the really powerful ones. But given on the time of year, the environment, the weather we've had, the gill, the stem, and the cap. Actually, no, it didn't have the ring, so it might have been the other brown, the Jim don't eat it. Oh, I forgot one other feature. Spore color. So mushrooms reproduce by dropping spores from those gills that are single cells that then grow into new mushrooms. They are not plants, they don't have seeds. But the spore color is another structural feature that you can use to identify the mushroom. To get the spore color, what you do is you take the cap, set it down on a piece of white paper, just put a glass over top of it, let it sit there for 4 or 5 hours. During that time, it will drop the spores. You lift the cap, you take the mushroom away. The spores will be on the white piece of paper, and it's really pretty actually, because it mimics the gill. It's almost like a thumbprint, but the color of the spore is another thing that you use to identify the specific species of the plant.
Would you say this one was a poisonous one?
I would say this one is a poisonous one or a magic one. It's not any of the edible ones for this area. I know that, but it has a number of structural features that are familiar, or that are in common, not with the sabicillin, but the other, the laughing monk, G something.